everyone, welcome back to But Why Though Reviews. I'm Kate and I'm here with Matt.
Hello.
And we had the great opportunity to cover South by Southwest Film and TV Festival this year in 2023. And one of the things we watched together was Wildlife, a National Geographic documentary from the directing duo Elizabeth Chai Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin, who you may know from the Academy Award nominated The Rescue, Meru, and Free Solo. If you are unfamiliar with Wildlife, here's a quick synopsis from Oscar-winning filmmakers Chai Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin. Wildlife follows conservationist Chris Tompkins on an epic, decade-spanning love story as wild as the landscape she dedicated her life to protecting. After falling in love in midlife, Chris and the outdoorsman and entrepreneur Doug Tompkins left behind the world of the massively successful outdoor brands they'd helped pioneer like Patagonia, The North Face, and Esprit, and turned their attention to a visionary effort to create national parks throughout Chile and Argentina. Wildlife chronicles the highs and lows of their journey to effect the largest private land donation in history. Matt, what did you think going into this film?
I was a little hesitant going into this film. I like the premise, and I kind of knew about some of the land stuff that they had been doing. Obviously, not to full extent that we saw in the film, but just kind of that they're working on. I was a little hesitant because I wasn't sure what story they were planning to tell. Like, was this just going to be about like the founders of these people who just bunch of kind of, to be honest, a bunch of rich people who just happen to have a lot of money to do some stuff, or like what were we actually going to talk about? And that's what I was thinking about going into this.
Yeah, I think for me, I came in with not a lot of knowledge about everything, but kind of trust in Chai and Jimmy to tell a story because I'm a huge fan of their past works, specifically The Rescue and Free Solo. So it, for me, I had seen their other stuff, and so I was like, okay, whatever they're going to give me is hopefully going to be well crafted. And so that's kind of how I entered it. That and it just looked beautiful. I think they made a really
Yes.
good decision
Yeah.
in how they marketed the film. Like the stills they chose to send out in press previews and even on the South by Southwest website, like it just looks gorgeous. And so I think that's a really easy way for people who may not know, like I didn't, what entice them to get involved, especially from National Geographic. So as we kind of look at the film, were there any things that stood out that you really liked that they were able to do?
Well, obviously the cinematography, as we talked about,
Oh
of
yeah,
all
the
all the
cinematography is and
like
they're doing that while hiking, like up
oh yeah.
mountains.
Yeah, no, like just the overall, like probably if you just watch this with like some, I don't know, like some lo-fi, just everything, it's just a beautiful watch because of how well they did everything. But obviously the whole film itself is gorgeous. And I think the actual story that they end up telling, I think overall is what I really enjoyed in the angle that they decide to go on. Because like even the description, you can talk about there's Patagonia, North Face, Espera, and then you have like a love story, and then everything else, and all these other people that end up being in the show, like, and that you end up being like, oh, and so I really like the direction that they ended up, I guess the individual story that they end up wanting to focus on, which ends up being Chris or Christine Tompkins' life and the love story between her and Doug and their accomplishments.
Yeah. And I think that I completely agree. I think that's what sets this documentary apart from the others for me. The others that I've seen now, or even that I've seen like in the past, I think I don't know. It was kind of special to watch with you, obviously, because we're married. But it's one of those things where like they center on how two people can propel each other to do something different and like how you can work for one another. But I think one of the best parts of the film for me was that it also showed kind of like how hard it is to lose someone. Like I was actually astounded by how open Chris got with how badly she handled Doug's death. And also like not only that, but also how do you honor the person that you've lost and how do you keep moving forward after it? And so I think that being able to capture like the longevity of love, but also how actions speak more into it than just memories, if that makes sense. I think when
Yes.
when folks watch the film, especially if you've lost somebody that you love or you're scared of losing somebody that you love, it really confronts the idea of what do you do in that empty space? And for Chris, she chose to not only just continue Doug's work, but to really make it bigger. And I think that that is something that is astounding and what lets this film kind of thrive. Because I agree with you from what you said in the beginning. Like, it would have been really easy for this documentary to be about a bunch of rich people, very specifically, a bunch of rich Americans who
Yes.
went into Chile with all their money and then were able to, quote unquote, save the environment. Like, that is something that we see so much of. It's something that gets done as like company propaganda a lot of the times, but that's not what was done here. And I think that you can see where the film brushes up on like it recognizes what it could have been, and you also get to see where it turns away from it, like, very explicitly.
Yeah, no, I obviously, like I said, the whole thing is about their relationship, and I think it's cool because you see it. One, you see the ups and downs of like even before they were together, because like as we even said in the, I guess, the synopsis, like they don't meet till they're like almost in their 40s.
Oh yeah.
So this isn't like some like, oh, high school sweetheart love thing. It's like, no, we had these whole journeys of our lives and
They
trends,
were
and
with people before.
yeah,
Like, he was married before. He built an entire brand with somebody
yeah.
before.
And so like, and then it's just this like whole thing of this connection of like, no, like let's do this. And I think, and it did a good job of showcasing of like, because obviously they were deeply in love with each other, but you could see that like they went back and forth, they fought and stuff, they had bickering, but at the end of the day it was all to like move forward to what they were doing and accomplishment. And I think some people always get this wrapped up in this mind of like, oh, when you're in love you don't fight or you don't have disagreements, and it's like, no, you do, but the main thing showcase, but no, you're always together and you're always
Yeah.
partners.
Yeah. And I think that that was what was done really well, because I think the cool thing that they did is you see the perspective from Chris, and they use like archival footage to show like their lives separately and their lives within like the brands and the companies that they were building and their love to the outdoors. But then they also talked to like their friends who saw them, and how like initially they were like, Chris, don't date that guy. He's a player. Please don't. This is a horrible idea. Or like how she's very upfront with like, I denied him at first many times. Or there was one specific one, I think it was the Patagonia owner, who talked about how they would constantly bicker or argue, and just kind of like what they would get out of it. And then immediately after, you get the perspective from another one of their friends who's like, they were like teenagers in love. They were always canoodling and like cuddling. And I think that there's something beautiful in showcasing that, because like you said, like everybody expects that it's all just a level plane of like constant adoration, without realizing that true respect for somebody is pushing them to do something more. And that's really what's captured here in like a really beautiful way. And the way it connects with the the love of the land and the pushes to really engage with the conversation about conservationism, which is kind of the like their love story is the large umbrella that we see for the narrative of the film. And then underneath you see the pieces like brand building, grief, and ultimately conservationism of the different elements within it. So what did you think, especially because you have the perspective like of somebody who's been in conservation?
So the first thing before we get to conservation, I do enjoy the fact that this man apparently made PowerPoints for his wife.
Okay, yes, that was adorable. He made like little slideshows, and he made like word art, like pictures of her with "I love you, Birdie," and it was the cutest thing. It was adorable.
Okay,
Where are my PowerPoints, Matt?
we've moved past PowerPoint. Okay,
Up your game.
remember, this is the 90s. Okay, so conservation part of this show. I This is where I kind of get hung up on, like, I think it's still good and worthwhile, and I really enjoy it, but like there are definitely some parts, which I think is where the filmmaker did a good job of like, we're going to focus on the love story, because they do talk about this deep like love of conservation, and then like the different types of conservation and the types of ecology of everything, of like, we need to preserve not just the land, but we need to do it in a way that like, humans are not first, because we've talked about like new conservation before, where it's like, how does this benefit humans, and then how does it benefit everything
It's
else
called
in
what, deep ecology, right?
Yeah, I think it believes in deep ecology, but obviously new conservation is a different method that's come around in the last, I don't know, 5-10 years at this point, where they look at the concept of like humans first, and then everything else second. And so this whole like, they do a good job of like showcasing like the struggles, and like how you can go out and get land and do fine to try to conserve it. But one, you're going to run into problem both with not even just like the government in general, but also the locals of everything. And then how do you make sustainability? Like they show that they do farming and they fail at that for a
Yeah,
while and they lose money. I don't know. This is where it gets a little thing because I think they do a great job and I think they truly care and have care and still care about like the people of Chile and the people of Argentina and obviously what they're doing. But it just sometimes it gets weird of like you still they dance a little bit around of the whole like basically a bunch of rich Americans came in and bought a bunch of land to save us.
exactly. And I think that that's like the inherent question I had while watching the film, because like they're just not buying uninhabited land in Chile. Like they are buying places where people lived. They are buying places where like companies um were working. And I think that it's a larger question of the film, which obviously I don't think this film ever makes the assertion that they're going to answer, but you do hear some of the Chilean side where there are kind of like blips spoken about how Chile is just trying to catch up with the rest of the world, and the way that they can do that is through mining or farming and different resources. And it never really tackles, like you said,
Well, they to be
that
fair, they do tackle a little bit of like they
they
basically took a
mention it.
they well because they talk we go from like basically the cowboys of like herding to basically now we are doing
Okay,
more
that's fair. Like,
conservation
yeah.
of like we're doing animal rescues and basically reintroduction
Yeah,
programs
they
and so
say
they
they what was it? They hired all of the gauchos, like the
yep
previous gauchos who used to catch and kill jaguars, to help re-release them. And
yeah
like,
and I think that's great and I think there's a few things and then the day of like you're we don't want to talk about it but like being a mining country is very very bad in a lot of
yeah,
environmental
no, and
ways
and
and
that's what I was
so
that's what I was trying to
yeah
get to, was like it shows that it's bad, and it's like, oh yeah, the conservation is more important, that which it is. Like, protecting the land is literally the most important thing, because we are all going to die without it. But also, maybe like Americans should stop mining.
it's this weird glimpse of I do think they do a decent job of showing towards the end of like I think the people that they worked with seem to fully embrace them and like it was truly of like we care about this land and we care about this country and we care about what we're doing and the people here and the locals do believe that we are doing something good and so I think they did at least a good job of showcasing that obviously you have like the resistance at the beginning which it makes sense in general from because we're talking about early 90s at this point late 80s when all this takes place when like
Like the ramifications of the Americans toppling the Chilean government for a dictator.
yeah, I mean, they're like, oh, why would we ever trust Americans? They literally put us all through this giant, terrible
Yeah.
regime. And I think they do, and that's the thing of I think it's a good job of showing that Chris and Doug and them did show that like, and the film shows that they did care for what they
Yeah.
were taking care of, and including the people. I don't think it quite answers the question of like where we're going afterwards. I don't think
Yeah.
it answers the questions and to be fair, as because I mean, obviously we watched this at the premiere of like they're talking about this is where a starting point to hopefully other people can do whatever. This is just our story, which I think they do a good job of explaining. Like this is just their story, and this is not the end all be all.
Yeah.
But at some point, it has to go back to like Americans trying to save Latin America, or even to the extent they talk about a little bit of Africa. At what point
Yeah.
do you need to start stopping the people who are causing all the waste?
Exactly. Yeah. No, and that's exactly put. Like, like Americans decide they want to save the world by going to save other people, instead of being like, oh yeah, deforestation's actually happening in the American Midwest right now too. Oil
Which they do
pipelines,
mention in
all
the
that
film of
stuff.
just
No,
everywhere,
I
but
liked that picture. They use an infographic or a heat map of deforestation, and it starts just in like, I think that this was kind of to your point of like how they kind of positioned it within a larger narrative of like
yes.
conservation. They start by showing the Chile and Argentina, which is a space that they're immediately like focusing on to save. And then they zoom out to show the entire world, and like includes like a lot of the red in the European and America, like in America. And I think as a starting point, it's really good. I think the finale of the film helped kind of change kind of that position that I had. Like, I kept thinking, like, but what about the people who
Yes.
live there? And then by the end of the film, they actually show like what those parks looked like, what the farms looked like, and it was all about creating jobs and not flying in people from the US to be the conservationists, but like working with the indigenous people of the land who have been tending to the land for so long, but just finding a new way to do it, which I think is a respectful way and like a really good way to highlight, because it makes it feel different than just the rich Americans came in to save the poor, the poor Latin Americans, and more
Yeah, I
like,
mean, it's still, I mean, it's just a weird thing because at the end of the day, because like they're like, how do you get started and do this? Well, hopefully you have $150 million.
yeah, like money is always the center of it, which,
And it's a weird part because it is like you start with a bunch of people, and it's a nice little thing because like you see a bunch of people like, hey, we made a ton of money off of capitalism,
yeah,
and then we realize, oh, we did bad. We probably should try to get save the world. And so it's a nice little story, but it still kind of, and obviously I know they didn't really focus on this part, but I kind of, this is kind of like the broader, I guess, conversation of leading like what after this of like, but do we have to always rely on somebody that has $150 million to get anything done?
yeah,
And like, because the big thing with the rainforest that people always talk about, and obviously I've learned this from doing many years of like classes and teaching of people, of everybody talk about, we got to save the rainforest, we got to save the rainforest. And the counter argument has always been, well, what happened to you all's rainforest? Like,
yeah,
why were you all able to prosper and deep? Like, we've destroyed our entire, country. Like, whether, we've in the Midwest, as you talk about, between the Dust Bowl, we've monocultured, we've homogenized all the crops, we've killed biodiversity, we've killed large cats, we've killed everything out to be so we could live comfortably. Why do we have to make sure that they have to basically live safe and, as they talk
yeah,
about a little bit, be a poor country?
yeah, yeah, no, I
And
completely agree.
so, and I think it sucks because like I think doing the overall aspect, the overall objective of, hey, we need to start saving the land is good, but at
Yeah,
some point it turns into, when's $150 million going to go like save Oregon
yeah,
or stop the people of like what we're doing here?
yeah,
Because while the mining countries of Chile is bad, they're not the people that are destroying all of everything and being the
exactly.
large polluters.
Yeah. And they're not the people asking for all of the things that are causing the pollutants.
Yes.
Yeah. That would be Americans' iPhones and their fast fashion.
Right.
Which like, and I think that is why this movie, I think for me, succeeds pretty much nearly perfectly, is because I don't think it ever situates itself as being something other than a conversation starter. It's like
Yes.
you are using a very, you're looking at a microcosm that is supposed to show like a larger conversation around it, but you're still just looking at two people's lives and the way that those two people changed each other's lives and how those two people started to build something. The questions that I think it raises is like why we're having this, this review episode, is what it's meant to do. It's meant to keep the conversation going. And I think my one fault with it is kind of like you said, like the crux of this is you must have $150 million
Yeah.
and have been a CEO of one of the largest outdoor brands in existence, which you already started because you were rich and could just make stuff.
Yes.
Um, and I think that's probably like the one thing that's missing if we take into account the Q&A that we saw after, where somebody had asked like, how do I start? And they were like, just go outside. And it's like, well, that's not actually a realistic answer for people who don't have the means. And I also think that, I mean, to be honest, like Patagonia, the North Face, all the things that were in here, those are luxury brands at the end of the day. Like they
Yes.
cost more because they're made effectively, efficiently, and like with carbon neutral footprints for the most part. But at the same time, like that then creates a barrier of entry for people who are trying to go into the outdoors because it costs money to. It sounds so dumb. Like just walking out your front door is actually really hard when you need equipment to not die in the cold. And that equipment costs $300 for a jacket. And I think, and I don't want to fault the movie too much because I feel like that's an outside conversation that it's
Yeah, which I guess is what we're trying to say. Like for the overall, what we're taking away and where we need to
yes,
go, that is my issue with it. But for what they tell in the story, like you said, it's good because this is at the end of the day a love story,
yes,
and we focus on in Chile because you know why, and we focus on this particular region because you know why, these people love to climb these mountains, and so they
yes,
want to save these particular
yeah.
mountains because this is where we're at. Like Patagonia, the brand, is named after a place in Chile.
Which, and I think that was something that I don't think we talked too much about. Well, when they talked about Doug's life and the way that he explored and the way he was a mountaineer and he was a surfer and how he fell in love with the land in like an intimate way of somebody who climbed the mountains, sometimes climbed the mountains for the first time. Like he named a whole mountain after his wife. Like,
For
Matt, where
Valentine's
are
Day.
you?
For
Like,
Valentine's Day. Nobody stands a chance at this point.
so like, and I think that there's an intimacy with the land that it really presents that I think is really emotional. Like, I think the film really harps on kind of that emotion that you build, and I think that it does it well. And it sets it up as like these aren't just people who feel entitled to the land so much as
Yeah.
welcomed into it. And I think
Yeah.
that that was the important thing of making it resonate with me, is because there's a mutual respect happening and not just a, oh, I belong. Like, does that make
Yeah,
sense?
because you know it does. Because I think, like I said, in the day, they have an actual attachment to why they are doing
Mm-hmm.
this particular area, which
Yeah.
is good. Which I think if we take the film of like when it's still taken away the capitalist part of like capital everything, you going outdoors, what part, what region, what land, what part of like I guess nature, as we say, resonates with you, and for you to go save those areas. And so like because like at the end of the day of like we talked about Oregon. Like, I don't go to Oregon. I don't know anything in Oregon, but I
Yeah.
do know places that are decimated around us.
Yeah.
And so, like, saving the areas for you, when you walk outside to go on your trail hike or your trail climb, what can you do to save those areas, preserve those areas? And I think that's what we try to tell in this movie, which I think is good because, like I said, it's all they have an attachment. There's a reason for this area. It's a reason for all this stuff, and it's their story for theirs. And so it, like I said, outside of just saving to start the conversation, but to also lead to like, can you all, when you're telling your stories and your attachments, to go do kind of inspire to like what we did, and now it's
Yeah.
your turn.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, when this comes out on National Geographic at the end of March and then later on Disney Plus, and it will have a theatrical run in select theaters in April. I'm assuming that's for awards pushes, if you want me to be honest. Do you think people should watch it?
I do. I think they live a very interesting life. Like we
They do.
found from
Like, that
anybody who
is
grew up apparently in the
interesting.
60s just made some weird, crazy stuff. And at least this one doesn't base it on like we did a bunch of illegal, terrible things to a bunch of people, like we see
Yeah.
in all the other documentaries. And I think overall, I think I do think so because it's one of those you can find of like if you're like, there's a few things you can take away from this. Of one, you can find love at any time.
Yes.
And two, like you're like, oh, I'm 26 and I haven't done anything. Well, these people don't even start their journeys, I guess, together until they're like in the 40s. Obviously,
Yeah.
building a brand might be a little thing career wise, but like even then, like the way they change, even this massive, conservation project that they do doesn't start till they're like together in their 40s.
Yeah.
Obviously, they have the $150 million help, but like it shows that you can keep doing things. And I do at the end of the day, we need to do something in conservation more than what we're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if a National Geographic documentary is going to save us necessarily, but if you can, I guess, get some sort of conversation to see, I think it'll help. And I think it's a very beautifully shot like documentary and
Yeah.
movie, and the story of them of Doug and Christine is just very well done.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that this is kind of similar to Fire of Love in the way that like it uses the connection two people have and then kind of looks outward from that connection and the way it impacts. And I think that alone is worth it. Because there's this I started crying like when they show like when Doug's, and it's not a spoiler obviously, like it's history, but like when Doug dies and the film kind of opens knowing that that happened, and then by the end of it you actually get to see Chris give her eulogy and like struggle to walk on to the stage, and like you hear her recount it, like it's just a really powerful love story. And I think that anybody can watch that and anybody can like
Yes.
be inspired by that. And I think you're absolutely right too. The takeaway, like the rest of like all of these older actors winning Oscars and like all these things, like you are not too old to start something, and it doesn't matter what that thing is. And like you said, probably don't have $150 million if you're listening to this podcast, but you can choose to do little things. And I know, like, at least for me, like we used to hike and I was watching, I was like, man, I want to go hiking again. Why did we stop hiking? So yes, I also think everybody should watch it. I think that of the documentaries I saw this festival, I think it's my favorite. And I think that that is a real testament to the way that Chai Vasarhelyi and Jimmy Chin have been able to once again articulate emotion and the land as much as the people who are on the screen talking. And I think that that's a skill that they continue to really bring forward. And I think that I think it has good awards contention. It's only March, but like I know that that's why they're putting it in theaters. So I just want to say that right now.
I think it's, and for me, I guess the best thing in the documentary, like you said, of like, there's something to go off of from this. It's not just that we learned about a bunch of stuff and we're done.
Exactly. Exactly. And then I think like inspirational documentaries are kind of like, I've been frustrated with them recently, but this one is just like, do you love someone? Okay, yes. Do you want to do stuff with them? Okay, yes. Let go do something like impactful with them, whether it's small or large. And I'm just kind of like, yes, I will. So but yeah, so as I said, Wildlife from National Geographic will air on National Geographic at the end of March. It will then be available, I believe, the next day on Disney Plus, and it will have a theatrical run starting April 14th in select cities. Matt, why don't you tell everybody on the internet where they can find you?
You can find me at I guess some of my writing from covering the festival at butwhythough.net, including a review of this, an overall written review of this documentary. And then I guess you can find me on Twitter at datm18, DATTM18.
And you can find me at Omemeth Randier, along with all my South by Southwest coverage, also at butwhythough.net. And you can find us as an outlet at butwhythoughpc wherever you get your social media fix, which I think like the landscape is somehow very, very large and dying at the same time. But
I have no idea.
hit us up, talk to us, and check out all our delicious South by Southwest coverage.